The ocean never forgets. 14-year-old Wren Hayes learned this truth standing in front of a collapsing cottage on the coast of Maine, holding a deed to a building that should have been condemned, and a letter from a grandfather she'd never met. The letter said she was old enough to understand duty. She wasn't sure about that. What she understood was cold and hunger, and the particular silence that comes from having nowhere left to go. The cottage had killed a man once. Everyone in Lighthouse Point knew that. They also knew it had saved over 100 others before the state pulled its funding and the town turned its back. And James Hayes died trying to keep a promise made to a dying sailor in dark water 50 years before. Now, the promise was hers, a stubborn girl with frozen fingers and $5 left to her name, standing at the edge of winter with nothing but her grandfather's words echoing in her head, "Finish what I couldn't." Behind her, a decommissioned lighthouse hadn't shined in 20 years. Ahead of her, a town that wanted the property demolished. And somewhere in the ruins, hidden beneath rotting floorboards, the truth about why some promises matter more than the people who make them, and why a 14-year-old orphan would choose to stay in a building the whole world had given up on. This is the story of what happened when she did. The ocean never forgets. Wren Hayes learned that on her 14th birthday, standing at the edge of a cliff, she didn't know she'd been walking toward her entire life. But that morning, December 16th, 1995, she woke up in her grandmother's house in Portland, Maine, believing the hardest thing about the day would be pretending she didn't care, that it was her birthday at all. She was wrong. The house smelled like coffee and old wood. The kind of smell that settles into a place after decades of the same person brewing the same dark roast in the same percolator. Her grandmother, Eleanor Hayes, had lived in this narrow Victorian for 43 years, raised Wren's father here, buried her husband here in a way his ashes scattered in the back garden beneath the oak tree that never quite recovered from the ice storm of '89. Wren dressed in the cold morning light, filtering through frost-etched windows. Jeans, flannel shirt, red and black third hand from the church donation box. Work boots her feet had finally grown into. She kept her dark hair short, practical. Cut it herself with kitchen shears over the bathroom sink. Easier that way. Less to worry about. Downstairs, her grandmother stood at the stove, back straight despite 71 years, hands steady as she flipped pancakes. Eleanor Hayes didn't do birthdays the way other grandmothers did. No balloons, no singing. Just pancakes, real maple syrup, and a kind of quiet acknowledgement that you'd survived another year. "Morning," Wren said. Eleanor glanced back. Her eyes, the same slate gray as Wren's, took in her granddaughter the way they always did. Assessing, measuring. Not unkindly, but without illusion. Pancakes are almost done. Wren sat at the kitchen table, scarred wood worn smooth by generations of elbows and homework and difficult conversations. Through the window, Portland stretched out under a December sky the color of old steel. Christmas lights blinked on neighboring houses, wreaths on doors, the world performing its annual ritual of forced cheer. Eleanor set a plate down. 3 pancakes, butter melting into golden pool syrup in a small ceramic pitcher shaped like a lighthouse. Wren had always wondered about that pitcher, never asked. Some questions felt too heavy for breakfast. They ate in silence, not uncomfortable. Just the quiet of 2 people who'd learned that words didn't fix anything. So why waste them? When Wren finished, Eleanor rose, cleared the plates, then reached into the pocket of her cardigan. She pulled out an envelope. Not a birthday card. Legal-sized cream colored the kind lawyers use. The return address read, Carver and Son Attorneys at Law Lighthouse, Point, Maine. "This came for you yesterday," Eleanor said. "I thought about not giving it to you." Wren took the envelope. Heavy paper. Her name written in formal script across the front. Miss Wren Hayes. "But you did," Wren said. "But I did." Eleanor sat back down, hands folded on the table. The morning light caught the deep lines around her mouth, the silver in her hair, the weight of years spent carrying losses she never quite set down. "Your grandfather," Eleanor said, and stopped. Started again. "James Hayes left you something. In his will. The lawyers have been sorting through probate. Took 3 years, apparently. Legal complications." Wren stared at the envelope. She'd never met her grandfather. He died in 1992, the same year her father did. 2 funerals in one summer. Eleanor had gone to both alone. Wren had been 11 too young, people said. Too fragile. As if shielding her from death would make it less real. "He left me what? Open it." Wren slid her thumb under the flap, tore it carefully. Inside a single sheet of legal paper, folded precisely. And beneath it something else, heavier. She pulled it out. A deed. Typed official, stamped with the seal of Hancock County, Maine. Property description. Lighthouse Keeper's Cottage lot. 47 Lighthouse Point. Parcel number. Survey coordinates. And at the bottom, in neat blue ink, transferred to Wren Elizabeth Hayes upon her 14th birthday, December 16th, 1995. Wren read it twice, then a third time. "I don't understand." Eleanor's voice came quiet, careful. "Your grandfather owned a property, out on the coast, an old cottage near an abandoned lighthouse. He lived there for years alone after your father left home. After everything." "Everything," Wren repeated. The word tasted like smoke. "After the incident. After he lost his position. After the town decided he was responsible for things that weren't his fault." Wren looked up. What incident? But Eleanor was already shaking her head. "Read the letter." Wren unfolded the legal document. Beneath the deed, clipped to it, a single handwritten page. The paper yellowed slightly at the edges. The ink faded but legible. Her grandfather's handwriting, she assumed. She'd never seen it before. It read, "Wren, if you're reading this, you're 14 years old. Old enough to understand that some debts outlive the men who owe them. Old enough to know that duty doesn't end when it becomes inconvenient. This cottage was my life's work. I built it for men who came home broken from wars that broke them in ways no one wanted to talk about. I made a promise long ago to a dying man, a promise to protect, to shelter, to never abandon those who served. I failed. The cottage fell into ruin. I grew too old, too tired, too alone to finish what I started. But you're young. And if you have even a fraction of the stubborn Hayes blood that runs in this family, you won't let what I built disappear. The cottage is yours. Do with it what you will. But know this: when you turn 14, you're old enough to decide who you want to be. Someone who runs from hard things, or someone who stays and fights for what matters. At 14, you're old enough to understand duty. Finish what I couldn't. Your grandfather, James Hayes Wren, read it twice, then set it down on the table, hands shaking slightly, though she wasn't sure why. Eleanor watched her. He was many things, your grandfather. Difficult, proud, haunted by things he never talked about. But he believed in duty, in keeping promises. Sometimes I think he believed in it more than he believed in people. Did you know about this, about him leaving me the cottage? Not until yesterday when that letter arrived. He and I hadn't spoken in years. Not since your father's funeral. And even then, barely. Wren picked up the deed again. The property description listed acreage, structures, a cottage, a workshop, the remnants of what had once been called the Lighthouse Point Veterans Rehabilitation Center. What am I supposed to do with it? Eleanor walked to the window, looked out at the gray morning. That's not for me to say, but I'll tell you this. Your grandfather spent 20 years trying to save that place. It nearly destroyed him. And your father grew up watching that destruction, watching his own father choose a broken building over his family. She turned back, and her expression held something Wren couldn't quite name. Warning, maybe, or grief. So, before you decide anything, Eleanor said, ask yourself what you're willing to sacrifice, because that cottage demands everything. It always has. Wren folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope with the deed. Outside, snow had begun to fall. Light, hesitant flakes that wouldn't stick. The kind of snow that promised nothing threatened. Nothing just existed in the space between sky and ground. I want to see it, Wren said. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly as if she'd known this was coming and dreaded it anyway. Of course you do. 3 days later, Wren stepped off a Greyhound bus at the Lighthouse Point station, which wasn't a station so much as a bench and a faded sign on Route 1. The bus pulled away in a cloud of diesel exhaust, leaving her standing on the shoulder of the road with her backpack and a duffel bag containing everything she thought she might need. The town of Lighthouse Point spread out before her. Small, weathered. The kind of coastal Maine town that survived on fishing tourism in summer and stubborn refusal to die in winter. Storefronts lined Main Street, half of them closed for the season, windows dark. A diner, a hardware store, a bait and tackle shop with a closed until spring sign hanging crooked in the door. The ocean lay beyond, invisible from here, but present in the salt smell of the air, the cry of gulls, the deep cold that came off the Atlantic in December and settled into bones. Wren adjusted her backpack and started walking. The address from the deed led her east out of town along a 2-lane road that hugged the coast. Cars passed occasionally, drivers glancing at her, a teenage girl walking alone in December. But no one stopped. She didn't expect them to. This far north, people minded their business. After 2 miles, the road curved and she saw it. The lighthouse first. White paint peeling red stripe faded to rust, standing on a rocky promontory like a sentinel that had given up watching but couldn't figure out how to fall. Decommissioned clearly. The beacon housing dark glass cracked the whole structure, listing slightly, as if the wind had been pushing it for decades, and finally started winning. And below the lighthouse, set back from the cliff edge, the cottage. Wren stopped walking. It looked worse than she'd imagined. Single-story wood frame construction, probably built in the 1940s or 50s. White clapboard siding, most of it gray now with age and weather. Roof sagging in the middle, shingles missing in patches like a mouth with broken teeth. Windows intact, some of them others boarded over with plywood that had warped and split. A porch wrapped around the front, the railing collapsed on one side. Steps leading up to a door that hung slightly crooked on its hinges. Beyond the cottage, she could see another structure, larger. A workshop maybe, or a garage. Its roof had partially collapsed, one wall caved in the whole thing, looking like it had taken a direct hit from something massive and never recovered. This was what her grandfather had left her. This ruin. Wren walked closer, boots crunching on gravel, then dead grass, then the uneven stones of what might have once been a path. Up close, the cottage looked even worse. Paint not just peeling, but gone in places, exposing raw wood gone soft with rot. Foundation cracked. One of the front windows broken, a triangle of glass still clinging to the frame like a last tooth. She climbed the porch steps carefully, testing each one before trusting it with her weight. The third step groaned, sagged, but held. The front door had a padlock, new-looking brass. Wren pulled the key from her pocket, the one that had been included with the deed in a small manila envelope. The key slid in, turned, and the lock popped open. She pushed the door. It scraped across warped floorboards, stuck halfway, and she had to put her shoulder into it to force it the rest of the way. The smell hit her first. Damp, mildew, old wood and older dust. The kind of smell that comes from years of windows. Closed air, unstirred time, settling heavy. The interior was dim. Gray winter light filtered through dirty windows and gaps in the boarded-up ones. She could make out shapes. Furniture, maybe. Shelves. Something that might have been a wood stove in the corner. Wren stepped inside. The floor creaked but held. She stood in what had been a main room. 20 feet by 20 feet roughly. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, blackened by decades of fires, the mantel thick with dust. An old sofa, springs visible through torn upholstery. A table, wooden scarred, 2 chairs pushed under it. Shelves lined the far wall, empty except for a few books with cracked spines and a rusted coffee can full of nails. To her left, a doorway led to what looked like a kitchen. Small. Sink with a hand pump. Cabinets with doors hanging open. Linoleum floor curled at the edges. To her right, another doorway. A bedroom, probably. And beyond that, she could see a third door closed. She walked through the cottage slowly, each room revealing more of the same. Decay. Abandonment. The accumulated weight of years no one had lived here. Cared for it, kept it from sliding into ruin. In the bedroom, a metal frame bed with no mattress. A dresser drawers pulled out empty. A window looking out toward the ocean, glass intact, but so dirty the view was just a blur of gray. The bathroom had a clawfoot tub, rust-stained, and a toilet with no seat. The mirror over the sink was cracked in a starburst pattern, as if someone had punched it once hard and then left. Wren returned to the main room, stood in the center of it, listened to the silence. Wind rattled something outside, a shutter maybe, or loose siding. The ocean murmured in the distance, a sound she'd never heard before moving here. but recognized instinctively. The rhythm of water against rock. Eternal. Indifferent. She thought about her grandfather, James Hayes, a man she'd never met, who'd lived here alone for years, who died trying to save this place from exactly what it had become. Why? What had driven him to pour his life into these rotting boards, this empty shell? And why had he left it to her? Wren pulled the letter from her pocket, read it again in the fading afternoon light. Finish what I couldn't. She folded it, put it back. Then she dropped her backpack on the floor, set down her duffel bag, and started looking for something she could use to make a fire. Night came fast in December this far north. By 4:30, the light outside had gone from gray to charcoal to black. Wren had managed to get the wood stove working, fed it with broken furniture she'd found in the back room. Pieces too damaged to save. The heat was minimal, more psychological than actual, but it pushed back the worst of the cold. She'd found a camping lantern in her duffel, battery-powered, and set it on the table. Its white LED light was harsh but functional. She ate a peanut butter sandwich she'd packed that morning, drank water from a bottle, and tried not to think about the fact that she was 14 years old, alone in a building that should probably be condemned with no clear plan beyond tomorrow. Outside, the wind picked up. She could hear it testing the cottage, probing for weaknesses, finding them. Somewhere, something banged rhythmically. A shutter. A loose board. She'd have to fix that. Add it to the list of everything else that needed fixing. Wren stood, took the lantern, and explored the cottage more thoroughly. In the back room, the one with the closed door, she found what her grandfather had used as an office. A desk, heavy oak, still solid. A chair with a broken back. File cabinets, 2 of them. Drawers stuck or rusted shut. Shelves filled with binders, papers yellowed, and brittle labels faded beyond reading. She opened the desk drawers one by one. Office supplies. Pens dried out. Rubber bands crumbled. A calculator from the 1970s, buttons worn smooth. The bottom drawer stuck. She pulled harder and it jerked open with a screech of wood on wood. Inside, a leather-bound journal. Wren lifted it carefully. The leather was cracked, darkened by age and oil from hands. No title on the cover. She opened it. The first page, in careful handwriting, read, Journal of James Hayes, Lighthouse Point Veterans Rehabilitation Center, January 1946. Her breath caught. She turned the page. January 15th, 1946. The cottage is finished. Took me 8 months working alone, but it's solid. Good bones. The workshop is next. I've got plans for a medical wing, but that'll take money I don't have yet. For now, this will do. I made a promise. To a man dying in water so dark you couldn't see your own hand. To a man who spent his last moments thinking about a son he'd never see grow up. I promised I'd take care of his boy. Make sure he had a chance. Tommy's son is 4 years old now. I found him and his mother in Boston. She's struggling. Working 2 jobs. I told her I'd help. Told her I'm building a place for men like Tommy. Men who served. Men who came home broken. She didn't believe me. I don't blame her, but I'll keep the promise anyway. That's what you do with promises made to dying men. Wren sat down in the broken chair journal in her lap and read. Entry after entry. Years of them. Her grandfather's handwriting growing more cramped. more hurried as the entries progressed, the story unfolding. The cottage opening in 1946. The first veteran arriving, a man named Douglas who'd lost both legs at Normandy. The second, a pilot who couldn't stop shaking. The third, the fourth, the 20th. James Hayes documenting each one. Their names, their injuries, what branch they'd served in, what they needed, how long they stayed, where they went after. By 1950, the center was running at capacity, 12 men at a time. James had built bunks in the workshop, converted it to dormitory space. A local doctor volunteered time. A woman from town brought meals twice a week. The entries grew more detailed, more personal. James describing midnight conversations with men who couldn't sleep. Teaching carpentry to a soldier whose hands shook too badly to hold a rifle anymore. Sitting with a Marine who cried for 3 days straight and then never cried again. Ren read faster. 1952. Korean War veterans started arriving. Younger men, different wounds, different war, same damage. The entries continued. More names, more stories. James wrote less about the logistics, more about the men, their struggles, their victories, the small moments that meant everything. A man laughing for the first time in 2 years. Another getting a letter from his estranged wife. A third finally sleeping through the night. Then the entries changed. Tone. 1978. Funding's gone. The state pulled the grant. Said there are better programs now. Official programs. They don't understand. Those programs don't work for the men I help. The ones too broken for official channels. The ones who need time, space, someone who doesn't give up on them. I told them I'd keep running it anyway, on my own. They said I couldn't. Liability, regulations, permits. I told them what they could do with their permits. The handwriting after that entry was harder to read, angrier. The entries shorter, more sporadic. November 1980. Roofs leaking. Can't afford repairs. March 1981. Workshop roof collapsed in a storm. No money to fix it. June 1983. Last veteran left today. Charlie. Good man. I hope he makes it. December 1985. Michael came to visit. My son. Told me I'm wasting my life. Told me I chose this place over his mother, over him. He's right. I did. Because I made a promise, and you don't break promises to dead men. He left angry. Don't know if I'll see him again. Ren's hands tightened on the journal. Michael. Her father. She turned the page. January 1992. I'm 74 years old. Too old for this. The cottage is falling apart. I'm falling apart. But I can't let it go. Can't sell it. Can't abandon what Tommy died believing I'd protect. I'm gonna try one more time. One more push. Fix the roof. Restore the workshop. Maybe get one more veteran through the door. If I die trying, so be it. Better that than dying having given up. The entries ended there. Ren closed the journal slowly. Her grandfather had died 6 months later. Heart attack, Eleanor had told her. Alone in this cottage, probably trying to nail shingles to a roof that didn't want to hold them anymore. She sat in the dark office lantern, flickering wind howling outside, and felt something she hadn't expected. Anger, not at her grandfather, at the world that had let this place fall apart, at the bureaucrats who'd pulled funding, at the town that had watched a good man destroy himself trying to keep a promise and done nothing. At herself, maybe, for never knowing this existed until 3 days ago. Wren stood, picked up the journal, walked back to the main room. She fed more broken furniture to the stove, sat on the old sofa despite the springs, and opened the journal to the first entry again. I made a promise. Outside, the wind tested the cottage walls. Snow began to fall harder, driven sideways by gusts that made the whole structure groan. Inside, a 14-year-old girl who'd never met her grandfather read his words by lantern light and made a decision. She'd stay. Not for sentiment, not out of some misguided attempt to honor a dead man she'd never known, but because finishing what someone started mattered. Because promises, even ones made to people who'd been dead for 50 years, still counted for something. And because she had nowhere else to go anyway. Morning came cold and pale. Wren woke stiff, the fire long dead frost on the inside of the windows. She'd slept in her coat using her duffel bag as a pillow, and her neck ached from the angle. She got up, stretched, felt every joint protest. Outside, the ocean was gray, choppy, throwing spray against the rocks. The sky threatened more snow, but hadn't delivered yet. Wren ate another peanut butter sandwich, drank the last of her water, and realized she needed supplies. Food, more water, firewood, tools, a list longer than the money in her pocket. She locked the cottage behind her and walked back toward town. Lighthouse Point in daylight looked exactly as tired as it had the day before. Main Street nearly empty. A few cars parked at odd angles in front of the diner. Smoke rising from chimneys. The hardware store opened its windows, displaying snow shovels and ice melt, and a handwritten sign that read, "Closed Sundays and most holidays." Wren pushed open the door. A bell chimed. The interior smelled like oil and sawdust and metal. Rows of shelves stocked with everything from nails to paint to mysterious plumbing parts she couldn't identify. A counter at the back, and behind it, a man. He was old. Late 60s, probably. Lean in the way that came from decades of physical work rather than age. Gray hair cut military short. Eyes that assessed her in one glance and saw more than she'd have liked. His right arm ended just above where the elbow should have been. The sleeve of his flannel shirt was pinned neatly up. He was sorting mail one-handed with the ease of long practice. "Help you." His voice carried the flat vowels of northern Maine. "I need supplies," Wren said. "Figured. Question is, supplies for what and whether you can pay for them." Wren stepped closer to the counter. "I'm working on the old cottage, out by the lighthouse." The man's hands stilled. He looked up, really looked at her now. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, maybe. Or concern. "The Hayes place." "Yes. James Hayes's place. My grandfather's place," Wren said. Silence. The man studied her. She met his gaze and didn't look away. "Your grandfather," he repeated. "You'd be Michael's daughter then." Wren Hayes. The man set down the mail, extended his left hand. Ford Mackenzie. She shook it. His grip was strong, calloused. Your grandfather was a good man, Ford said. Stubborn as hell, but good. Did you know him? Ford smiled, but there wasn't much humor in it. He saved my life, twice. Once in 1954, once every day after. I've been trying to pay that debt for 41 years. Wren waited. Ford gestured at the empty store. Slow morning. You want coffee? I've got a pot in the back. We can talk. I don't need charity. Didn't offer any. But if you're planning to work on that cottage, you should know what you're getting into. And I'm one of the few people left in this town who remembers what it was supposed to be. Wren hesitated, then nodded. Ford led her through a door behind the counter into a small back room. Workshop space, mostly. A workbench covered with tools. A coffee maker on a shelf, the pot half full. The coffee looking like it had been there since dawn. He poured 2 mugs, handed her one, and gestured to a pair of stools. They sat. Your grandfather built that cottage in 1946, Ford said, right after the war. He'd served in the Pacific, Navy. Survived the sinking of the USS Indianapolis. Wren blinked. What? You don't know the story. I never met him. My grandmother doesn't talk about him. I didn't even know I had a grandfather until a lawyer sent me a deed 3 days ago. Ford shook his head slowly. Families. They bury things and think that's the same as dealing with them. He sipped his coffee. July 1945. USS Indianapolis. Cruiser. Got torpedoed by a Japanese submarine after delivering parts for the atomic bomb. Ship went down in 12 minutes. 900 men in the water. Middle of the Pacific. No rescue for 4 days. His voice was steady, factual, like he was reciting history he'd heard 100 times. By the time help arrived, only 316 men were still alive. Sharks, exposure, dehydration. Men going mad and drowning themselves. Your grandfather was one of the survivors. Wren felt something cold settle in her stomach. He never talked about it, Ford continued. Not to me directly, but he wrote about it. In the journals he kept. Said he made a promise to a dying shipmate. Man named Tommy. Tommy made him swear to take care of his son. Made him swear not to let the boy grow up without knowing his father died for something. So he built the cottage. He built the cottage, intended it as a place for veterans who came home broken. Men who needed time, space. Someone who understood. By 1950, he was running a full rehabilitation center. 12 beds. Volunteers from town. It worked. Really worked. Ford paused. I came through in 54. Lost my arm in Korea 2 years before. Came home and couldn't figure out how to live with it. Thought about eating a bullet more than once. Your grandfather found me drunk outside Portland. Brought me here. Kept me here until I stopped wanting to die. He held up his left hand. Taught me to use this. Taught me carpentry. Gave me a reason to wake up. Wren looked at the man across from her. Saw the age, the scars, the steadiness that came from surviving things that should have killed you, and choosing to keep living anyway. Why did it close? She asked. Money. Politics. Regulations. Ford's voice hardened. The state decided official programs were better. Cut the funding. Your grandfather fought them. Kept it running on his own for years. But he was one man. And this town. He gestured vaguely. This town decided he was a liability. Too old. Too stubborn. A lawsuit waiting to happen. So they let it die. They let him die trying to save it. Ford met her eyes. Which brings me to you. What are you doing out there, Wren Hayes? Fixing it. You're 14 years old. Old enough. Ford studied her, then nodded slowly. Maybe. You got your grandfather's eyes. That same look like you've already decided and nothing's gonna change your mind. I have. Even knowing it'll be the hardest thing you've ever done, that this town will fight you. That winter's coming and that cottage barely has a roof. Especially knowing that. Ford smiled. This time it reached his eyes. Yeah, you're a Hayes. He stood, walked to the workbench, and started pulling items. A hammer, nails, a pry bar, work gloves. You'll need tools. I've got extras, and lumber. There's a stack of salvage wood out back. Been sitting there for years. Take what you need. I can't pay you. I'm not asking you to. Your grandfather gave me my life back. Least I can do is give his granddaughter some 2x4s. Wren stood. I'll pay you back. Eventually. I know you will. That's why I'm helping. They loaded supplies into Ford's truck. An old Ford F-15. Oh, that looked like it had survived several wars itself. He drove her back to the cottage, helped her unload, and stood looking at the building with an expression Wren couldn't read. It's worse than I thought, he said finally. I can fix it. You'll need more than tools. Then I'll figure it out. Ford turned to her. I can teach you. Carpentry. Construction. I've got time and not much else to do with it. But you have to understand something. This town has a developer. Man named Porter Ashford. He's been trying to buy this property for 10 years. He wants to tear it down, build a resort, high-end, ocean views, money. It's not for sale. He knows that now. But he's got the town council in his pocket. He'll find a way to force you out. Condemnation, safety violations. You're a minor. He'll use that. Let him try. Ford nodded. All right then. We start tomorrow. Sunrise. Bring work gloves and a willingness to learn. He climbed back into his truck, started the engine, then leaned out the window. One more thing. Your grandfather used to say something. A promise made is a debt unpaid. He believed that, lived it, died for it. If you're going to finish what he started, you need to understand. This isn't about the building. It's about keeping faith with men who died believing someone would remember them. The truck pulled away, leaving Wren standing in front of the cottage, the ocean wind cutting through her coat, the sky releasing snow that had been threatening all day. She looked up at the sagging roof, the broken windows, the peeling paint. Then she picked up the hammer Ford had given her and walked inside to start sorting through what could be saved and what had to be torn down. That night, by lantern light, Wren found the hidden room. She'd been pulling up rotten floorboards in the back bedroom, planning to replace them, when one section lifted differently, hollow underneath. She pried up more boards and found a trap door. Metal, rusted but solid. A handle recessed into the surface. She pulled. The door resisted, then gave with a shriek of metal on metal. Below, darkness. A ladder metal rungs descending. Wren grabbed the lantern and climbed down. The space was small. 10 feet by 10 feet. Concrete walls. Dry. A generator in one corner, old but intact. Shelves along one wall stocked with supplies. MREs. Water jugs. Medical kits. A radio military style with a hand crank. Batteries. Blankets. Everything you'd need to survive for weeks. A Cold War bunker. Built beneath the cottage. On the far wall, a metal box. She opened it. Inside, more journals. 3 of them. And beneath the journals, photographs. Wren lifted the photos carefully. Black and white. Faded. Men in Navy uniforms, young, smiling, standing on the deck of a ship. She turned one over. Handwriting on the back, USS Indianapolis, July 1945. Another photo. Same ship. Different men. Her grandfather in this one unmistakable. Younger than she'd imagined. Maybe 25. Standing with his arm around another sailor. Both of them squinting into the sun. She turned it over. Jim and Tommy. Best friends. Brothers. July 28, 1945. 2 days before the ship sank. Wren sat down on the concrete floor, photos in one hand, lantern in the other. She opened the first journal. The handwriting was her grandfather's, but different from the journal upstairs. Shakier. Written in bursts as if he'd only been able to manage a few lines at a time. August 2nd, 1945. We've been in the water for 4 days. I don't know how many of us are left. The sharks came on the 2nd day. The screaming stopped on the 3rd. Tommy died this morning. He knew he was dying. Dehydration. Exposure. Maybe something internal from the blast when the ship went down. He couldn't move his legs anymore. Couldn't feel them. He made me promise. Made me swear on everything I believe in. He said, "Jim, I've got a boy. 2 years old. Never gonna see him grow up. Never gonna teach him to throw a ball or ride a bike or be a man." He said, "Promise me you'll find him. Promise me you'll make sure he knows his father didn't die for nothing." I promised. He died an hour later. I held his head above water until he stopped breathing. Then I let him go. And I'm still here. Still breathing. Still promising. Wren turned the page. August 5th, 1945. Rescue came today. 316 of us left out of 900. I'm alive. I don't know why. Don't know what I'm supposed to do with that. Except keep the promise. Find Tommy's boy. Make sure he's okay. Make sure Tommy's death meant something. That's all I have now. The promise. The entries continued. Her grandfather being debriefed. Hospitalized. Recovering. then tracking down Tommy's family, finding the boy, the widow, realizing they were struggling, deciding to do more than just visit, deciding to build something, a place, a refuge, for Tommy's son, for all the sons of men who didn't come home, for the men who came home broken. The cottage ran red until her eyes burned, and the lantern battery warning light blinked. Then she climbed back up the ladder, replaced the floorboards, and sat in the dark main room with her grandfather's words echoing in her head. A promise made is a debt unpaid. Outside, snow fell harder now. The wind drove it against the windows. The cottage creaked and settled, old wood adjusting to new weight. Wren pulled her coat tighter and fed the last of the broken furniture to the stove. Tomorrow, Ford would come. They'd start repairs. And she'd begin the work of turning this ruin back into what it was supposed to be. Not because she owed her grandfather anything, but because some promises outlived the men who made them. And someone had to keep them. Ford Mackenzie arrived at sunrise. Wren heard his truck before she saw it, the engine's low rumble carrying across the frozen ground. She was already outside, standing in front of the cottage, breath fogging in the December air, watching the sky lighten from black to iron gray. The truck parked. Ford climbed out carrying a thermos and a paper bag that smelled like fresh bread. "Breakfast," he said, handing her the bag. "Can't work on an empty stomach." Inside were 2 still warm rolls from the bakery in town. Wren hadn't realized how hungry she was until the scent hit her. They ate standing on the porch looking out at the ocean. The water was dark, restless, white caps visible even from here. The lighthouse stood silent against the morning, its beam housing empty glass, catching the weak sunlight. "Your grandfather used to stand right here every morning," Ford said. "Same time, same view. Said it reminded him why the work mattered." Wren swallowed a bite of bread. What did he mean? Ford nodded toward the ocean. Out there, men died. Men he knew. Men he made promises to. He said if you were going to keep a promise to the dead, you had to look at where they died every single day. Had to remember it wasn't abstract. It was real. They finished eating in silence. Then Ford set his thermos down and pulled work gloves from his pocket. "We'll start with the roof," he said. "Everything else is secondary if water keeps getting in. I've got tarps in the truck. We'll patch the worst sections, then work on permanent repairs once we've got materials." Wren followed him to the truck, helped him unload. Heavy blue tarps, coils of rope, a nail gun that looked older than she was. Ford handed her a harness. "Safety first. Your grandfather would kill me if I let you fall off his roof." They worked through the morning. Ford on one section of roof, Wren on another, both of them moving carefully across shingles slick with frost. The wind came off the ocean in gusts strong enough to make balance difficult. But Ford moved with the easy competence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, and Wren followed his lead. He taught her how to find the solid parts of the roof structure, how to distribute her weight, how to secure tarps so they wouldn't tear loose in the first storm. He didn't talk much while working, just demonstrated and let her figure it out. By noon, they'd covered the worst sections. The cottage looked worse than before, blue tarps visible from the road like bandages on a wound. But it was progress. They climbed down, and Ford pulled sandwiches from a cooler in his truck. Ham and cheese. Simple. They sat on the tailgate and ate. "You're a fast learner," Ford said. I pay attention. That's half of it. The other half is not being afraid of the work. He glanced at her. You afraid of falling off a roof? Yes. I meant of failing, of not being able to save this place. Wren looked at the cottage, at the tarps, the broken windows, the sagging porch, at everything that still needed fixing. I can't afford to be afraid, she said. There's no backup plan. Ford nodded slowly. Your grandfather said the same thing, right before he built this place with his bare hands and a promise he couldn't break. That afternoon, while Ford worked on reinforcing the porch, Wren went back down into the bunker. She'd been thinking about it since last night, about the journals she'd found, about Tommy's son. She brought the journals up into the light, set them on the kitchen table, and started reading chronologically. The entries after the rescue were sparse. Her grandfather recovering in a naval hospital, being debriefed about the sinking, dealing with survivor's guilt, though he never called it that, just wrote about not sleeping, about seeing faces in the water every time he closed his eyes. Then in September 1945, a longer entry. Found Tommy's family today. His widow Mary is living in a boarding house in Boston, working as a seamstress. Tommy's son Charles is 2 years old. Bright kid. Looks like his father. I told Mary about Tommy, about what he said before he died, about the promise. She cried. Then she told me she doesn't need charity, doesn't want pity. I told her it's not charity, it's duty. And I'm gonna make sure Charles grows up knowing his father died a hero. She didn't believe me. Can't blame her. Talk is cheap. But I'm gonna show her. Gonna build something. Something that matters. Something Tommy would have been proud of. The entries continued. Her grandfather buying land in Lighthouse Point with his Navy discharge pay. Drawing plans for a cottage. Starting construction in January 1946. Working alone through winter, spring, summer. The cottage finished by fall. Then the first veteran arrived. A man named Douglas who'd lost both legs at Omaha Beach, followed by others. A steady stream through 1947, 1948, 1949. And in 1950, this entry, Charles is 7 now. Mary brought him to visit the cottage. First time. He's a good kid. Smart. Asks a lot of questions. I showed him around. Told him this place exists because of his father. Because Tommy made me promise to do something that mattered. Charles asked if his dad was brave. I told him the truth. His father was the bravest man I ever knew. Wren turned more pages. The entries about Charles continued sporadically. Annual visits. Charles growing up. Graduating high school. Joining the Navy himself in 1948, following his father's path. Then in 1951, this got a letter today. Charles is dead. Killed in action. Korea. He was only 23. Barely older than Tommy was when the Indianapolis went down. His son, a boy named after me, James Douglas, is just 6 months old. 2 generations. Tommy, then Charles. Both gone. I can't breathe. Can't think. But the promise doesn't end. Can't end. The boy needs someone. Mary is 70 now, too old to raise an infant alone. I told her I'd help, however I can, for as long as I can. This is the promise, isn't it? Not just Tommy, not just Charles, but everyone who comes after. The handwriting after that grew erratic. Entries short questioning. Her grandfather struggling with the weight of it all. Then, in 1954, a different tone. James Douglas arrived today. Everyone calls him Ford. He's 24. Just back from Korea himself. Lost his right arm in combat. Mary asked if I could help him. I didn't tell him about his grandfather, about the promise I made in the water 55 years ago. He doesn't need that weight. He just needs someone to help him figure out how to live with what he lost. So that's what I'll do. Same as I've done for 100 men before him. Keep the promise. One more time. Wren stopped reading. Ford. James Douglas. Called Ford by everyone. Tommy's grandson. The boy whose grandfather died in the water. Whose father died in Korea when Ford was an infant. Who came to the cottage broken and left whole. And her grandfather had never told him. Had kept the connection secret. Had helped him simply because that's what the promise meant. Not just Tommy's family. Everyone. Wren stood up, journal in hand, and walked outside. Ford was under the porch hammering new support posts into place. He heard her approach, slid out, wiping sawdust from his shirt. "Found something?" he asked. She held up the journal. "Your grandfather's name was Tommy." Ford went very still. "Your father was Charles. He died in Korea in 1951. You were 6 months old." Ford's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "Your grandfather made my grandfather promise to take care of Charles. And Charles's son. Which means you. Your full name is James Douglas. After my grandfather and your grandfather." Ford looked at her, then at the journal, then out at the ocean. "I wondered," he said quietly. "I wondered why Jim took me in, why he cared so much. I figured it was just who he was, helping veterans, but it always felt personal, like he was doing it for more than duty." "He was keeping a promise," Wren said, "made to your grandfather, in the water, while he was dying." Ford sat down on the porch steps. Wren sat beside him. "I never knew," Ford said. "Never knew there was a connection. Jim never told me. Just helped me. Taught me. Gave me a reason to keep living when I'd run out of reasons." "He wrote about you," Wren said. "Said you were proof the promise mattered. That even though he couldn't save Tommy or Charles, he could help you, and that was enough." Ford's jaw worked. He stared at his hands. The left one whole. The space where the right one should have been. "My father," he said. "I never knew him. He went to war before I could remember anything. My grandmother, Mary, raised me. She told me my father was a hero. Told me my grandfather was too. That they both died for their country." He paused. "Then I went to war myself. Korea. Got my arm blown off. Came home and realized there's no such thing as dying for your country. There's just dying. And the people left behind trying to make sense of it." He looked at Wren. "Your grandfather gave me that sense. He made my father's death mean something by making sure I didn't waste my life." and I never knew why until right now. They sat in silence. The ocean's sound filled the space between words. Does it change anything? Ren asked. Knowing. Ford thought about it. No, and yes. The debt I thought I owed Jim, I owe even more now. 3 generations of Hayes men keeping promises to 3 generations of my family. He stood. Which means I'm going to help you finish this. Not just because Jim asked, but because that's what we do. We keep promises. That night, Ren couldn't sleep. She lay on the old sofa wrapped in the sleeping bag Ford had brought her, and thought about chains of promises stretching across decades. About men dying in water in wars, separated by years but connected by blood and duty. She thought about her father, Michael Hayes, who'd grown up watching his own father pour everything into the cottage and nothing into family, who'd left angry and died before reconciliation had he known about the promise. About Tommy, about the chain of obligation that drove his father. Or had he just seen abandonment? Ren pulled out her grandfather's letter again. Read it by flashlight. At 14, you're old enough to understand duty. Was she? The next morning brought the first real snow. Not the light dusting from days before, but heavy flakes that fell thick and fast, accumulating quickly. By mid-morning, 3 inches covered the ground. By afternoon, 6. Ford arrived anyway. Helped Ren seal gaps in the walls where wind was getting through. Showed her how to pack insulation, how to cut and fit pieces of salvaged board to cover the worst holes. They worked inside the wood stove, burning their breath, still visible but less so. Progress in inches. At noon, a truck pulled up outside. Expensive. New. A Land Rover, black pristine despite the snow. A man climbed out. 50s. Well-dressed. Wool coat, leather gloves. He looked at the cottage the way someone might look at a condemned building, with distaste and calculation. Ford muttered something under his breath. That's Porter Ashford, he said. The developer I told you about. Ren set down her tools and walked outside. Ford followed. Ashford approached boots crunching in the snow. He had the kind of face that probably smiled often in professional settings, but wasn't smiling now. You must be the Hayes girl, he said. Ren Hayes. Porter Ashford. I own Ashford Development. We've been interested in this property for some time. It's not for sale. Ashford smiled thinly. I'm not here to make an offer. I'm here as a concerned citizen. This building is a hazard, structurally unsound, a danger to anyone inside it. The town council has authorized me to inform you that we're filing for emergency condemnation. On what grounds? On the grounds that a 14-year-old minor is squatting in an unsafe structure with no legal guardian present, no utilities, and no viable means of making necessary repairs. Ashford pulled a document from his coat. You have 72 hours to vacate. After that, the building will be demolished. Ford stepped forward. She's not squatting. She owns this property. Legal deed. A deed transferred to a minor, Ashford said smoothly, which requires adult oversight. Where are her parents? Her legal guardian. Her grandmother, Ford said. In Portland, an hour and a half away. Not exactly supervising, is she? Ashford looked back at Ren. I'm sure you mean well, but this isn't sustainable. The cottage is beyond repair. Let it go. The town will compensate you fairly for the land. No, you're being unreasonable. I'm being clear. The cottage stays. I stay. You can take your condemnation and your compensation and leave. Ashford's expression hardened. You don't understand the situation. This town needs development, jobs, revenue. This property is prime coastal real estate being wasted on a ruin. We're trying to help you. Help yourself, you mean? Ford said. Ashford ignored him, focused on Wren. 72 hours. After that, the sheriff will remove you by force if necessary, for your own safety. He walked back to his Land Rover, climbed in, and drove away, tires spinning slightly in the snow before finding traction. Wren stood watching until the truck disappeared. He can't actually do that, she said. Can he? Ford's expression was grim. He can try. And with the town council backing him, he might succeed. You're a minor. No guardian on site. No running water, no electricity, no heat except that wood stove. They'll argue it's neglect. Unsafe living conditions. So what do I do? Fight. Get a lawyer. Show them you're making legitimate repairs. Prove the cottage can be habitable. Ford paused. Or call your grandmother. Have her come here. Legal adult presence might be enough to stop them. Wren thought about Eleanor. About asking her to leave Portland to come to the place she'd spent years trying to forget. I'll figure something else out, she said. That night, Wren went back to the bunker. Not for journals this time. For the metal box she'd seen in the corner. The one she hadn't opened fully yet. Inside, beneath more photographs, she found blueprints, architectural drawings, professional quality, dated 1947, signed by her grandfather and a local architect, whose name she didn't recognize. The plans showed not just the cottage, but an entire complex. 3 buildings, the cottage for living quarters, a workshop twice its current size, with dormitory space for 20 men, and a third structure labeled medical wing, examination rooms, recovery beds, a small surgery, a pharmacy. Her grandfather's full vision, what he'd intended to build. Only the cottage had been completed, the workshop partially. The medical wing never started. At the bottom of the blueprints, a note in her grandfather's handwriting, Phase 1 cottage. Complete 1946. Phase 2. Workshop expansion. Complete 1948. Phase 3 medical wing. Funding needed $50,000. Status denied. Reapplying 1950. Beneath that, stamped in red ink, application denied. And beneath that, another note. This one dated 1978. They'll never approve it. Too expensive. Too ambitious. Too much liability. But the need hasn't changed. Men still come home broken. If I can't build it all, I'll maintain what I have. The promise doesn't require a perfect facility, just a real one. Wren spread the blueprints across the concrete floor, studied them by lantern light. Her grandfather had dreamed bigger than one cottage. He'd wanted to create something permanent, something that could help hundreds of veterans, a full center. And he'd been denied, over and over. But he'd kept trying, kept maintaining what he had. Kept the cottage running until his body gave out. Wren traced the lines of the medical wing with her finger. The rooms that had never been built. The help that had never been offered. All because of money. She thought about Porter Ashford, about luxury resorts and ocean views and revenue, about priorities. The next morning, Ford brought coffee and bad news. "Town council meeting last night," he said. "They voted. Condemnation order is official. You've got 48 hours now. They moved it up. They can't just. They can." And they did. Porter's got them convinced this is about safety. About protecting a minor from her own bad judgment. Ford's voice was tight with anger. I tried to speak. Told them about Jim's work. About what this place meant. They didn't want to hear it. Wren sat down on the porch steps. The snow had stopped, but the ground was covered, white and clean and indifferent. What happens in 48 hours? Sheriff comes, removes you, seals the building. Demolition crew follows within a week, probably. I need more time. I know. That's why I talked to someone. Ford hesitated. There's a lawyer, Margaret Walsh. She's in Portland, specializes in property rights cases. I called her last night, told her the situation. I can't afford a lawyer. She works pro bono sometimes, for cases she believes in. I think she'll believe in this one. Ford pulled a card from his pocket. Her office opens at 9. I can drive you there this morning. Wren took the card. Margaret Walsh, attorney at law. An address in Portland's Old Port. Why would she help? Because her father was a Korean War vet. Came home with PTSD. Your grandfather helped him in 72. 3 months at the cottage. Her father always said Jim saved his life. Ford met her eyes. This place has a history. People remember. Not everyone, but enough. They drove to Portland through snow-covered roads. Ford's truck handled it easily, but the journey took 2 hours instead of 90 minutes. They didn't talk much. Just the sound of the engine, the heater, the wipers clearing snow from the windshield. Margaret Walsh's office was on the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse building. Small, efficient. Bookshelves lined with legal texts. A desk covered with case files. Walsh herself was in her 40s. Sharp eyes behind glasses. She listened to Wren's story without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When Wren finished, Walsh sat back. I remember your grandfather, she said. My father talked about him constantly, about the cottage, about how Jim never gave up on anyone. She looked at her notes. This condemnation order is aggressive, but not without legal basis. You're a minor. The property arguably isn't habitable. They can make a case. So I lose? Not necessarily. If we can show you have proper guardianship, that repairs are actively being made, that the property can be brought to code within a reasonable time frame, we might get an injunction, delay the demolition, give you time. How much time? 30 days, maybe 60 if we're lucky. But you'd have to show real progress, not just intentions. Wren thought about the cottage, about everything that needed fixing. I can do that. Walsh studied her. You understand this will be difficult. The town council wants this property gone. Porter Ashford has money and influence. You have determination and a dead grandfather's promise. That's enough. Walsh smiled slightly. Maybe it is. All right. I'll file an emergency injunction this afternoon. Request a hearing. We'll need your grandmother there. As legal guardian, can you arrange that? Wren nodded, though she had no idea if Eleanor would come. One more thing, Walsh said. Why does this matter to you? You never met your grandfather. You could sell the land, take the money, walk away. Why fight? Wren thought about Tommy dying in dark water, about Charles dying in Korea, about Ford losing his arm, and finding a reason to live in a cottage by the ocean. Because some promises don't die when the person who made them dies, she said. And someone has to keep them. Walsh nodded slowly. Your grandfather would have said exactly that. The hearing was scheduled for December 23rd, 5 days away. The injunction held until then. No demolition, no removal. But no guarantees after. Wren called her grandmother from Walsh's office. Eleanor answered on the third ring. It's Wren. I know. Are you safe? Yes. But I need you to come here. To the cottage. There's a legal hearing. I need a guardian present or they're going to demolish the building. Silence on the line. Then, Wren let it go. Let them tear it down. Come home. I can't. You're 14 years old. I know how old I am. Do you? Because you're acting like you have to carry the weight of your grandfather's failures on your shoulders. You don't. He made his choices. They don't have to be yours. Wren gripped the phone tighter. He wasn't a failure. He kept a promise for 50 years. And I'm going to finish it. More silence. Then Eleanor's voice, softer. You sound like him. Just like him. Stubborn and certain and completely unwilling to see reason. Will you come? A long pause. When is the hearing? The 23rd. That's 2 days before Christmas. I know. Eleanor sighed. I'll be there. The line went dead. Ford drove Wren back to the cottage. The sun was setting, the sky going from gray to darker gray. Christmas lights in Portland had given way to empty roads, then snow-covered fields, then the coast. When they pulled up, the cottage looked different. Not better exactly, but less temporary. The blue tarps on the roof, the boards over broken windows, the smoke rising from the chimney that Wren had started before leaving that morning. Signs of life. Ford helped her unload supplies they bought in Portland. Food, a space heater that ran on propane, more tarps, nails, wood, things they'd need for the next phase of repairs. 5 days, Ford said. We need to show progress, real visible progress. Can you work every day until the hearing? Yes. Good. I'll be here at dawn. Bring work gloves and coffee. He drove away and Wren went inside. The cottage was cold despite the fire. She fed it more wood, watched flames catch and grow, sat on the sofa with her grandfather's journals and read by firelight. Entry after entry, year after year. Names of veterans, their stories, their struggles, their victories. And woven through it all the thread of Tommy's promise. The debt that never quite got paid, because it was endless. Every man helped was another payment. But the debt remained. Wren understood now. Her grandfather hadn't been trying to finish paying the debt. He'd been trying to honor it every single day for the rest of his life. And now that work was hers. The next 4 days blurred together. Dawn to dusk. Work. Repair. Progress measured in inches. Ford taught her framing. How to replace rotten wall studs. How to square corners. How to read a level and trust what it told you. They worked side by side. Ford moving with one arm, but twice her efficiency. Wren learning fast and pushing herself harder than she probably should have. They replaced the front porch steps, rebuilt the porch railing, tore out and replaced water-damaged sections of interior walls, cleaned windows, patched holes, made the cottage look less like a ruin and more like a building someone actually lived in. Word spread in town. Some people drove by to watch. A few stopped, offered encouragement. One older man, a veteran Ford knew, brought a box of old tools. Jim would want someone using these, he said, but others stayed away. Or worse, stopped and shook their heads. Waste of time, one woman muttered loud enough to be heard. That place should have been torn down years ago. Porter Ashford drove by twice. Didn't stop. Just slowed, looked, and drove on. On the 22nd, Eleanor arrived. Her car pulled up in the late afternoon, a sedan Wren recognized from Portland. Eleanor climbed out, looked at the cottage, then at Wren standing on the newly rebuilt porch. They stared at each other across the snow-covered yard. Eleanor looked older than Wren remembered. Tired. But her back was straight. Her expression unreadable. "Show me," Eleanor said. Wren gave her the tour. The cottage. The repairs. The bunker below. The journals. The blueprints. Everything. Eleanor walked through, silently touching walls, examining Ford's work, reading her dead husband's handwriting in journal entries she'd probably never wanted to see. In the main room, she stopped at the fireplace, looked up at a photo Wren had found and framed. Her grandfather, young, in his Navy uniform, smiling. "I forgot he looked like that," Eleanor said quietly. "Young, before everything." Before what? Eleanor turned. Before the promise consumed him. Before he chose Judy over family. Before he became the man who couldn't let go. She gestured at the cottage. This place was his obsession. I lived with him for 20 years and came second to it every single day. He was trying to help people, I know. And that's what made it impossible to hate him for it. How do you compete with dying men's promises? How do you ask someone to choose you over that? Eleanor's voice cracked. But I was his wife. And Michael was his son. And we needed him too. Wren didn't know what to say. Eleanor wiped her eyes. But here you are, doing exactly what he did, choosing this place over everything else, over safety, over sense, over me. I'm not choosing it over you. Aren't you? You're 14. You should be in school. Living in Portland, being a kid. Instead, you're here freezing, working yourself to exhaustion, trying to save a building that doesn't want to be saved. It does want to be saved. Grandfather wanted it saved. Your grandfather is dead, Wren. and you can't bring him back by finishing his work." The words hung between them. Outside, the sun was setting. The ocean had gone dark, invisible except for the sound. "I know I can't bring him back," Wren said finally, "but I can finish what he started. I can keep the promise. And maybe that matters." Eleanor looked at her. Really looked. And something shifted in her expression. "You're so much like him," she said. "And like Michael, my son, your father, who spent his whole life trying to prove he was different from his father. Who chose to save people too. Who died doing it." "I didn't know Dad that well," Wren admitted. "I was 11 when he died. He was a Coast Guard pilot, rescue swimmer. He saved 73 people in his career, and he died trying to save 3 hikers who got caught in an ice storm they had no business being in." Eleanor's voice was thick. The official report said he had time to turn back, that the weather was too dangerous, that he made a choice to attempt the rescue anyway. He saved them, 2 of them. The 3rd died before he got there, and Michael's helicopter went down in the storm. They found the wreckage 3 days later. Wren felt something tighten in her chest. "I was so angry at him," Eleanor continued, "for dying, for choosing strangers over his own daughter, over me, for being just like his father." She paused. "But then I read his last report, the one he filed before the rescue attempt. It said, 'Cannot in good conscience abandon civilians in distress, attempting retrieval despite conditions.'" Eleanor pulled a folded paper from her purse, old, creased. She handed it to Wren. It was a photocopy of the report, her father's handwriting, and at the bottom a single line underlined twice. "Some promises you keep because they're convenient. Some you keep because they're who you are." Wren read it 3 times. "He knew," Eleanor said, "about his father, about the cottage, about Tommy. He knew, and he chose the same path anyway, not out of obligation, but because it's who he was." She looked at Wren. "And it's who you are too. I can see that now. I can fight it. I can beg you to come home. But you won't. Because you're a Hayes. And Hayes women and men don't abandon promises." Wren's throat was tight. "Will you help me at the hearing?" Eleanor nodded slowly. "I'll help, but on one condition. After we save this place, you promise me you'll live. Really live. Not just work, not just keep promises, but be 14, be young, have a life beyond these walls. I promise." Eleanor pulled her into a hug, brief, tight, then stepped back. "Your grandfather was infuriating," she said, "but he was good, and what he built mattered. So let's make sure it survives." The hearing was held in the Lighthouse Point Town Hall, a small room, folding chairs, a long table at the front where the town council sat. 5 members. Porter Ashford sitting in the front row of the audience section. Margaret Walsh arrived with Wren and Eleanor. Ford came too, and to Wren's surprise, a dozen others. Veterans, men in their 60s and 70s, some walking with canes, one in a wheelchair, all of them here. The council president, a woman named Judith Morrison, called the meeting to order. Porter's lawyer spoke first, argued that the cottage was unsafe, that Wren was a miner without proper supervision, that the repairs were superficial, that demolition was the only reasonable option. Then Margaret Walsh stood. She presented the deed, the legal transfer, Eleanor's presence as guardian, documentation of repairs completed, letters from contractors including Ford attesting to the structural improvements. "This isn't about building codes," Walsh said. "This is about property rights. My client owns this land legally. She has guardian supervision. She's making good faith efforts to restore the property. The town has no legitimate grounds for condemnation." Morrison looked at the paperwork. The concern remains that a 14-year-old cannot reasonably maintain a property of this size. With respect, Council President, many 14-year-olds in this country live on family farms and contribute significantly to property maintenance. Age alone isn't a disqualifying factor. One of the council members spoke up. "What about the building's history, the Veterans Rehabilitation Center? That was never properly licensed. If Ms. Hayes intends to continue that use, there are regulations. My client intends to restore the cottage as a private residence. Any future use would require appropriate permits and licensing. But that's not the question before you today." Morrison glanced at Porter, then back at Walsh. "I'd like to hear from the community. Does anyone wish to speak?" Ford stood. "My name is Ford McKenzie. I served in Korea, lost my arm in combat. In 1954, James Hayes brought me to that cottage and saved my life. Not once, twice. He taught me carpentry, gave me purpose. I owe everything I have to what he built." Ford gestured to the other veterans in the room. "These men have similar stories. The cottage wasn't just a building. It was hope. It was proof that someone cared when the government didn't. When the VA failed us, Jim Hayes didn't." Another veteran stood, older, leaning on a cane. "My name is Robert Dalton, Army, World War II. I stayed at the cottage in '49. I was 24 years old and couldn't hold a job because my hands shook from shell shock. Jim Hayes taught me patience, taught me it was okay to be broken. Took me 3 years to recover. But I did, because of that cottage." One by one they stood, told their stories, named what the cottage had meant, what James Hayes had done. The room grew quiet. Morrison looked uncomfortable. She glanced at Porter again, then at the veterans, then at Wren. "This council will take a brief recess to deliberate." They left the room. 15 minutes passed. 20, 30. When they returned, Morrison's expression was careful, neutral. "This council recognizes the historical significance of the property in question. We also recognize the good faith efforts being made to restore it. However, we remain concerned about safety and compliance issues." Wren's heart sank. Morrison continued. "Therefore, we're issuing a conditional ruling. The condemnation order is suspended for 90 days. During that time, Ms. Hayes must bring the property up to minimum residential safety codes, electrical, plumbing, structural certification. If those standards are met, the property may continue as a private residence. If not, the condemnation order will be reinstated." She looked directly at Wren. 90 days, Ms. Hayes. Make them count." The gavel came down. Outside, snow was falling again. Heavy flakes, the kind that accumulated fast. Walsh shook Wren's hand. 90 days is better than nothing. But you've got work ahead of you. Real work. Electrical and plumbing aren't cheap. I'll figure it out, Wren said. Ford was waiting by his truck. With him, the other veterans. They approached as a group. One of them, the man who'd spoken about shell shock, stepped forward. "We took a collection," he said. He handed Wren an envelope. $3,000, it's not much, but it should cover some of the electrical work. Wren stared at the envelope. "I can't take this." "You can, and you will, because Jim didn't charge us to stay at the cottage. He gave freely. Now we're giving back." Another veteran spoke. "I'm a retired electrician. I can help with the wiring. No charge." "I know a plumber," another said. "He owes me a favor." One by one they offered help. Skills, time, money, everything they had. Wren's vision blurred. She blinked hard, trying to keep tears back. "Thank you," she managed. Ford put his hand on her shoulder. "This is what community means. What Jim built wasn't just a cottage. It was a network of people who remember, who care, who keep promises too." They drove back to the cottage through the snowstorm, Eleanor following in her car. The roads were bad, visibility poor, but they made it. Inside, they built a fire, sat around it. Ford, Eleanor, Wren. 3 generations connected by one man's promise. 90 days, Eleanor said. "Can you really do it?" "Yes," Wren said, without hesitation. Ford nodded. "We'll do it together." Outside, the storm intensified. Wind howled. Snow piled against the windows. The cottage groaned and settled, old wood adjusting, but it held. And somewhere, in the darkness beyond the snow, the ocean kept its rhythm. The sound that had been there when her grandfather made his promise. The sound that would be there long after. Wren looked at the fire, at the people beside her, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not alone. The storm raged through the night. By morning, 2 feet of snow covered the ground. The ocean was invisible behind sheets of white. The wind had shifted, coming from the northeast now, carrying the smell of ice and salt. Ford checked the weather radio he'd brought days ago. "Nor'easter," he said. "Big one. They're calling it the worst December storm in 30 years. Eleanor looked out the window. "Can we leave, get back to Portland before it gets worse?" "Too late. Roads are already closed. We're here until it passes." They spent the day inside, rationing firewood, staying warm. Ford and Wren reinforced windows against the wind. Eleanor cooked soup on the wood stove using canned goods from Wren's supplies. By evening, the power was out across the entire coast. They could see it from the windows. No lights anywhere. Just darkness and snow and wind. Ford tried the radio again. Static. Then a voice, broken and faint. "All vessels, extreme conditions, avoid." More static. Coast Guard delayed response. The signal cut out completely. Ford set the radio down. "They're overwhelmed. Emergency services. This is bad." Hours passed. The storm didn't let up. If anything, it grew worse. Then close to midnight, the emergency radio crackled. Not the weather station. A different frequency. the one for distress calls. Mayday, mayday, this is Coast Guard Cutter Resolute. Engine failure. Taking on water. Position. Static drowned the rest. Ford grabbed the radio, tried to respond. Nothing. The signal was gone. But they'd heard enough. Somewhere out there in the dark and the storm, a Coast Guard vessel was in trouble. 8 crew members, maybe more. And no one could reach them. Wren stood, walked to the window, looked out at the lighthouse barely visible through the snow, its beacon housing, dark for 20 years. But in the bunker below the cottage there was a generator, emergency supplies, everything needed to power basic systems, everything needed to light a beacon. She turned to Ford. "The lighthouse," she said. "Can we make it work?" Ford's eyes widened. "You're serious?" "They need a signal, something to guide them. The Coast Guard can't get there in time, but we're here, right here. The beacon hasn't been operational in decades. The wiring's probably shot. The bulb's probably broken, even if we could get power to it. Can we try?" Ford looked at Eleanor, at Wren, at the radio still crackling with static. Then he stood. "Get the generator from the bunker," he said. "I'll find tools. If we're doing this, we're doing it now." The generator weighed 70 pounds. Wren and Ford carried it between them, struggling through knee-deep snow wind tearing at their clothes. Eleanor followed with tools and cables wrapped in a tarp, her face set against the cold. The lighthouse stood 50 yards from the cottage. Might as well have been a mile. They moved in darkness, broken only by Ford's flashlight. The beam swallowed by swirling snow before it reached 10 feet. The wind came in gusts strong enough to knock them sideways. Wren's fingers were numb inside her gloves within minutes. The lighthouse door was frozen shut. Ford slammed his shoulder against it once, twice, 3 times. The door gave with a shriek of rusted hinges. Inside was marginally better. No wind, but the cold was absolute. Their breath fogged thick in the flashlight beam. The circular interior room was empty except for debris. Broken glass, bird droppings, water stains on the walls. A metal staircase spiraled up into darkness. "Generator stays here," Ford said, setting it down. "We'll run power up, but first we need to see what we're working with at the top." They climbed. The stairs were solid but slick with ice. Wren counted steps. 40, 50, 60. Her legs burned. The cold seeped deeper. At the top, a small room, hexagonal. Windows on all sides, most cracked or missing entirely. Wind screamed through the gaps. And in the center, the beacon housing. It was larger than Wren had imagined. 4 feet tall, 3 feet wide. Glass panels. A massive bulb inside, dark and dusty. Wiring snaked down through the floor, disappearing into the structure below. Ford examined it with his flashlight, moving around it slowly. "It's old," he said. 1940s technology. But it's built to last. He touched the wiring. "This is shot. Corroded through. We'll have to bypass it, run new cable directly from the generator." "Can we do that?" "In theory, if the bulb still works. If the motor that turns the beacon still functions. If we don't electrocute ourselves in the process." Ford looked at her. "This is dangerous, Wren. Even if we get it running, there's no guarantee it'll help. The Coast Guard might not see it, might already have the situation handled. Or they might need it. Ford nodded slowly. Yeah, they might. They descended, brought up the generator, then made trip after trip carrying cable tools, duct tape, wire strippers. Eleanor stayed at the base feeding them supplies, her hands shaking from cold. In the beacon room, Ford worked with Wren holding the flashlight. He stripped corroded wiring, spliced new connections, wrapped joints with electrical tape that kept wanting to freeze to his fingers. An hour passed. Then, two. The cold became something beyond discomfort. It was pain. Physical. Consuming. Wren's teeth chattered so hard, she thought they might crack. Almost there, Ford muttered. He was working one-handed, using his teeth to hold wire, his left hand to twist and connect. Just need to ground this properly, or we're going to blow the whole system. Below, Eleanor called up. The radio's broadcasting again. They're still calling for help. Ford finished the connection, looked at Wren. Here's the moment of truth. We fire up the generator, hope the beacon works, and pray we don't burn the whole lighthouse down. Do it. They descended again. Ford primed the generator, set the choke, pulled the starter cord. Nothing. He pulled again. The engine cough died. Third pull. The engine caught, sputtered, roared to life. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, echoing off stone walls. Ford adjusted the throttle, let it warm up, then flipped the power switch. They waited. Nothing happened. Then, overhead, a sound. Mechanical. Grinding. The screech of metal on metal. And light. Faint at first. Flickering. Then stronger. Brighter. The beacon ignited a brilliant white beam that cut through the darkness, through the snow, out across the invisible ocean. It began to rotate. Slow. Steady. The motor grinding but functional. The beam swept across the water. Once, twice, 3 times. A lighthouse alive again after 20 years of silence. Wren ran outside, stood in the snow, watched the beam sweep the sky. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Eleanor came up beside her, tears on her face freezing in the wind. Jim would have loved this. He's here, Wren said. I think he's here. They stayed outside watching the light until Ford called them back in. We need to monitor it, he said. Make sure the generator doesn't quit. Make sure nothing overheats. This is jury-rigged to hell. Could fail any second. They took shifts. One person in the lighthouse, one in the cottage monitoring the emergency radio, one resting. The night stretched endless. The storm didn't break. At 4 a.m, Wren's shift in the lighthouse, she heard it. The radio crackling to life. Ford's voice hoarse with exhaustion. Wren, get down here. She ran. Nearly fell on the stairs. Burst into the cottage. Ford had the radio pressed to his ear. Eleanor beside him, face pale. See a light. Navigation beacon. Can you confirm the Coast Guard frequency? Official communications. Affirmative, we have visual on a coastal beacon. Steering toward it now. Position stabilizing. Ford looked at Wren. They see it. The lighthouse. They're using it to navigate. Minutes crawled. The radio crackled with updates. The cutter was taking on water, but the pumps were holding. They were steering toward the beacon, toward shore, toward the lighthouse. 20 minutes later, a new voice on the radio. Calmer. Controlled. "This is Coast Guard Station Portland. We have visual on Cutter Resolute. Rescue vessels en route. Estimate arrival 30 minutes. Another voice. The cutter's captain. "Portland, we're holding position using coastal beacon. Request identification of beacon source." Silence. Then, "Stand by Resolute." Ford set the radio down. "They don't know. The lighthouse has been decommissioned for decades. They don't know who turned it on." "Does it matter?" Wren asked. "No, I suppose it doesn't." They waited. The generator kept running. The beacon kept turning. The light kept shining. At 5:30, as the first gray hint of dawn touched the eastern sky, the radio confirmed it. Cutter Resolute secured. All crew accounted for. No casualties. Vessel under tow to Portland. 8 people. Alive. Because a lighthouse that should have been dark wasn't. Ford turned off the radio, sat back in his chair, put his face in his hand. "We did it," he said quietly. Jim's lighthouse saved them. Eleanor was crying, not hiding it, just letting tears fall. Wren felt something break open inside her. Not sadness, relief, joy, exhaustion, everything at once. They left the generator running, the beacon turning until the storm began to break around noon. The wind died. The snow stopped. Visibility returned. The ocean appeared gray and restless, but visible. And in the distance, boats. The Coast Guard cutter being towed. Support vessels surrounding it. Wren stood outside the lighthouse, watching them pass. One of the rescue boats changed course, headed toward shore toward them. It pulled up as close as the rocks allowed. A figure in a Coast Guard uniform stood at the rail, raised a hand in salute. The gesture said everything. "Thank you, we see you. This mattered." Wren saluted back. The boat turned and followed the others toward Portland. Ford came out, stood beside her. "They'll want to know who activated the lighthouse. It'll raise questions. Legal questions, probably. Let them ask." "Wren, we saved 8 people, Ford. If that's illegal, I'll deal with the consequences." He smiled. "Your grandfather said the same thing once. About 20 different times, actually." They shut down the generator, secured the lighthouse, and trudged back to the cottage, through snow that was already starting to melt in weak sunlight. Inside, the wood stove was nearly out. They fed it, built the fire back up, collapsed in exhaustion. Wren slept for 12 hours straight. When she woke, it was dark again. Evening. The cottage was warm, the stove crackling. Eleanor was cooking something on it. Soup from the smell. Ford sat at the table reading one of the journals. "You're awake," he said. "Good. We've got company coming." "Who?" "Coast Guard. They radioed while you were asleep. Want to talk to whoever activated the lighthouse." Wren sat up. "When?" "Tomorrow morning. Official visit." Ford didn't look concerned. "Also, the town council called. They want an emergency meeting. About the lighthouse. About what happened." "Are we in trouble?" "Unknown. But Porter Ashford left 3 messages. Sounds different than before." Eleanor brought over a bowl of soup. "Eat first, worry later." The Coast Guard arrived at 10 the next morning. 2 officers, a commander and a lieutenant. They climbed out of a jeep, both in dress uniforms, despite the snow still covering the ground. Wren met them on the porch, Ford and Eleanor flanking her. The commander was older, 50s, gray at the temples. He extended his hand. "Commander Richard Hayes," he said, then caught himself. "Wait, Hayes, Wren Hayes. Any relation to Michael Hayes, Coast Guard pilot, died in '92. Wren's breath caught. He was my father. The commander's expression softened. I served with him, out of Station Cape Elizabeth. He was a good man. One of the best pilots I ever knew." He paused. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." The commander looked at the lighthouse, then back at Wren. "Did you activate that beacon last night?" "Yes, with help." She gestured to Ford. "Do you understand that operating a decommissioned navigational aid is a federal offense?" "I do now." The commander studied her. "Why'd you do it?" "Because people needed help and we had a way to help them." He nodded slowly. "The crew of the Resolute is alive because of that light. All 8 of them. One of those crew members is a 72-year-old civilian, Daniel Ashford. He was aboard as an observer documenting coastal operations for a town development project. When the cutter lost power, he was in the most danger. Hypothermia. Pre-existing heart condition. The delay in rescue could have killed him. Wren felt the name register. Ashford, you know him, his son, Porter Ashford. He's trying to condemn this property." The commander's eyebrows rose. "Is that so?" "Did Daniel Ashford survive?" Ford asked. "He's in Portland General, stable. They think he'll make a full recovery." The commander looked at the cottage, the lighthouse back at Wren. "Officially, I need to report the unauthorized activation. Unofficially, I'm going to recommend the Coast Guard sends you a letter of commendation instead of a citation. What you did was illegal. It was also exactly what a lighthouse keeper would have done. And given your father's service, given the circumstances, I think we can make an exception." He saluted. "Thank you, Ms. Hayes. Your father would be proud." They left. Ford let out a long breath. Well, that went better than expected. That afternoon, Porter Ashford arrived. He looked different. Rumpled. Tired. He climbed out of his Land Rover and stood staring at the lighthouse for a long moment before approaching the cottage. Wren met him at the door. "Is it true?" Porter asked. His voice was rough. "You activated the lighthouse during the storm?" "Yes. My father was on that cutter." "Did you know that—" "I found out this morning." Porter's face worked. "He's 72 years old. He has a heart condition. If he died out there—" He stopped. Started again. "The doctors said another hour in those conditions, and he wouldn't have made it. The rescue delay, the cold, the stress, it would have killed him. I'm glad he's okay. You saved his life." Porter's voice cracked. "You saved my father's life." Silence. Porter wiped his face. "I need to tell you something. About why I wanted this property. Why I pushed so hard. You don't owe me." "Yes, I do. Please." Wren stepped aside. Let him in. They sat at the table. Eleanor made coffee. Ford listened from his chair by the fire. Porter wrapped his hands around the mug like he was trying to absorb its warmth. "My father was in the Navy," he said. "Served in Korea. Never talked about it much. But after the war, he struggled. PTSD, they call it now. Back then, they just called it weakness. He couldn't hold a job, couldn't sleep. My mother left him because of it. I was 6 years old." Porter stared into his coffee. "He ended up here, in Lighthouse Point, 1954. Broken, suicidal. And your grandfather took him in. Brought him to this cottage. Spent 6 months helping him. Teaching him carpentry. Giving him purpose." Wren glanced at Ford. Ford was staring at Porter with recognition dawning in his eyes. "My father never forgot that," Porter continued. "He talked about James Hayes constantly, about the cottage, about how it saved him. He wanted to preserve it, to see it continue." "Then why did you try to tear it down?" Wren asked. Porter's jaw tightened. "Because my father has cancer. Pancreatic, stage 4. The medical bills are crushing us. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Insurance doesn't cover half of it. I thought if I could buy this land develop, it'd make enough money to pay for his treatment." He stopped, looked up at Wren. "But he told me yesterday in the hospital that he'd rather die than see this place destroyed. He said James Hayes gave him life. The least he could do was let someone else give life back to the cottage." Porter pulled an envelope from his coat, set it on the table. "I'm withdrawing the condemnation order. All town council actions against the property. It's done. And this," he tapped the envelope, "is a check. $50,000. It's what I would have paid for the land. Consider it a donation. For restoration. For keeping my father's memory of this place alive." Wren opened the envelope. The check was real. $50,000. "I can't accept this." "You can. And you will. Because 8 people are alive today because you had the courage to light that beacon. One of them is my father. This is the least I can do." He stood, extended his hand. "Thank you, Wren Hayes, for everything." She shook his hand. "Thank you for stopping the fight." Porter left. His Land Rover disappeared down the snow-covered road. Ford spoke first. "Did he just say his father was here in 54? Eleanor nodded. "That's what he said." Ford stood, walked to the shelf where Wren had organized the journals, pulled down the one labeled 1954, flipped through it. "Here," he said, "April 1954. New arrival today. Daniel, age 26, Navy Corpsman, Korea. Severe PTSD. Suicidal ideation. Wife left him. 6-year-old son in state care. He needs help. I'll do what I can." Ford read further. June 54. Daniel is improving, learning carpentry. His hands don't shake as much. He asked about his son today. First time he's mentioned him in 2 months. Progress. September 54. Daniel is leaving today. He's got a job lined up in town. Carpentry work. He's going to fight for custody of his son. I think he'll make it. He's one of the successes. proof the work matters. Ford closed the journal. Daniel Ashford, Porter's father. He was here the same year I was. Did you know him? Wren asked. I remember a Daniel. Quiet guy. Good with wood. We worked together on rebuilding the porch. Ford's voice was distant. I didn't know his last name. Didn't know he had a son. We didn't talk about things like that. Just worked. Just healed. Eleanor picked up the check. $50,000. That'll cover the electrical work, the plumbing, certification, everything the council required. And more, Ford said. With this, you could actually finish what Jim started. Not just make it livable, make it functional. A real center again. Wren looked at the check, at the cottage around her, at the journals stacked on the shelf containing the names of 100 men who'd found hope here. We'll need help, she said. We'll get it, Ford replied. The town council meeting was held on December 28th. The room was packed. Veterans, town residents, reporters who'd heard about the lighthouse rescue. Judith Morrison called the meeting to order. We're here to address the Hayes property and the recent lighthouse activation during the storm of December 24th. She looked at Wren. Ms. Hayes, the Coast Guard has informed us they're not pursuing charges. They've also recommended the lighthouse be officially recommissioned as an active aid to navigation, given its proven utility. Do you have any objection to that? No objection. Good. The council has also reviewed the latest engineering reports on the cottage. With the funding now available and with Mr. Ashford's withdrawal of the condemnation petition, we see no reason to prevent restoration work from continuing. Morrison paused. However, there's been discussion about the property's future use. Several community members have approached us about reinstating it as a veterans support facility. I'd like to hear from Ms. Hayes on that topic. Wren stood, looked around the room, at faces watching her, waiting. My grandfather built this cottage to keep a promise, she said, to a man who died in the ocean, to that man's family, to everyone who served and came home broken. He spent 50 years trying to make that promise mean something. And I think it did. I think the 100 men who found help at the cottage would say it did. She took a breath. I want to finish what he started. Not exactly the same way. Times have changed. Regulations have changed. But the need hasn't. Veterans still need support. Still need a place where someone understands. Still need hope. I'm going to restore the cottage. Turn it into a Veterans Resource Center. Properly licensed. Properly funded. A place where people can get counseling, job training, housing assistance. A place that honors what my grandfather built by making it relevant for today. And I'm going to keep the lighthouse running. Because lighthouses don't just guide ships. They remind us that even in the darkest storms, someone's keeping watch. Someone cares if you make it home. The room was silent. Then someone started clapping. One of the veterans. Then another. Then the whole room. Morrison smiled. I think that's a yes from the community. This council approves the continuation of restoration work and supports the establishment of the Hayes Veterans Resource Center, pending appropriate licensing and oversight. The gavel came down. Outside, snow had started again. Light flakes. Peaceful. Ford caught up with Wren on the steps. "You did good in there. I just told the truth. The truth is usually enough." He looked at the lighthouse visible in the distance. "Your grandfather would be proud. Really proud." That night, Eleanor sat Wren down in the cottage. "There's something you need to know," Eleanor said, "about your father, about the day he died." Wren waited. Eleanor pulled out a folder. Old, worn. "After Michael died, the Coast Guard sent me his personal effects, his flight log, his final report. I read it once and never looked at it again. But I think you should see it now." She handed Wren the folder. Inside a flight log. Her father's handwriting. The last entry dated December 15th, 1992. Mission search and rescue. 3 civilian hikers, Mount Washington area. Ice storm conditions. Command recommends abort. Conditions too dangerous. Personal note. I can't turn back. My father spent his whole life teaching me that you don't abandon people who need help. He built a cottage for strangers because he made a promise. He chose duty over safety every single day. I understand now why he did it. Not because he didn't love us, but because loving us meant showing us what it means to be someone worth loving. Someone who keeps promises. Someone who doesn't abandon people in the dark. If I turn back now, those hikers die. And everything Dad taught me about duty, about honor, about keeping promises becomes meaningless. I'm going in. If I don't make it back, tell Wren her grandfather and her father both loved her. And that love sometimes looks like leaving, like choosing strangers, like keeping promises that cost everything. But that doesn't make the love less real. It makes it the truest thing we have." The entry ended there. Wren read it 3 times, her hands shaking. "He knew," she whispered. "About grandfather, about the cottage, about all of it. He knew," Eleanor confirmed. "And he chose the same path, not out of obligation, but because it's who he was, who he wanted to be." "Did he save them, the hikers?" Eleanor nodded. 2 of them, a man and his daughter. The third was already dead when Michael arrived. He got the other 2 into the helicopter, but the ice was too heavy on the rotors. They went down. Michael died. The 2 hikers survived. She handed Wren another piece of paper. A letter. This came a month after the funeral. From the man Michael saved. His daughter was 14. Same age you are now. He wrote that Michael died a hero. That his daughter is alive today because of that choice. Wren read the letter, then set it down carefully. 3 generations, she said. Grandfather, Dad, me, all doing the same thing. Keeping promises, Eleanor agreed. It's what Hayes family does, whether it's smart or not, whether it costs everything or not. You keep promises. She pulled Wren into a hug. But you're also going to live. You're going to be young. You're going to have a life beyond these walls. That's my requirement. You hear me? I hear you. Good. Winter gave way to spring slowly. Snow melted. Ice broke up. The ocean began to soften from gray to blue. The cottage transformation accelerated with Porter's funding. Electricians, plumbers, carpenters. The building came to life properly. Running water, heat, lights, windows replaced, walls repaired, paint. By April, it looked less like a ruin and more like what it had always been meant to be. A home, a refuge. The official licensing took months. Paperwork, inspections, regulations. But in June 1996, the Hayes Veterans Resource Center opened its doors, not as a rehabilitation facility. Those required different permits, different staff, different everything. But as a resource center, a place veterans could come for information, for job training workshops, for counseling referrals, for community, for hope. The first veteran through the door was a young man, 23, Gulf War, PTSD, unemployed, lost. He stood in the main room looking around at the restored space, at the photos on the wall. James Hayes, Michael Hayes, the USS Indianapolis, the lighthouse. Wren approached him. "Welcome," she said. "I'm Wren Hayes." "Jason," the young man said. "Jason Torres. I heard about this place. Heard you help veterans." "We try." "What do you need?" "I don't know. Everything, nothing. He stopped. "I can't figure out how to live anymore. How to be normal. How to not feel like I'm drowning every single day." Wren recognized that look, had seen it in her grandfather's journal entries, in descriptions of men who'd come through these doors 50 years ago. "You're not drowning," she said. "Not here. Here we help you learn to swim again." She introduced him to Ford, who ran the carpentry training program, to a counselor who volunteered twice a week, to other veterans who understood. And she showed him the lighthouse, took him up the spiral stairs to the beacon room. "This lighthouse was dark for 20 years, Wren said. Everyone thought it was useless, broken beyond repair. But it wasn't. It just needed someone to believe it could shine again." She looked at Jason. "Same as you." He stared out at the ocean, at the light dancing on the water, at the endless horizon. "How old are you?" he asked. 15. "And you run this place?" "I keep it going, but Ford helps. The community helps. Everyone who believes in what my grandfather started helps. It's not about me. It's about the promise." Jason nodded slowly. "Can I come back tomorrow?" "You can come back every day if you want." He did. And the day after that. And the day after that. Within a month, Jason had a job. Carpentry apprentice working with Ford. Within 3 months, he'd found an apartment. Within 6 months, he was volunteering at the center helping other veterans who came through, looking for the same hope he'd found. And he was the first of many. Summer came, then fall, then winter again. On December 16th, 1996, Wren's 15th birthday, she stood in front of the cottage with Eleanor and Ford. The building gleamed with fresh paint, white clapboard, red trim. The porch rebuilt, windows clear, smoke rising from the chimney where veterans inside shared coffee and conversation. Behind the cottage, the lighthouse stood tall, its beacon operational, officially recommissioned by the Coast Guard. Every night it swept the ocean, guiding ships, keeping watch. 1 year, Eleanor said. You've been here 1 year. Feels like longer, Wren replied. Feels like always, Ford corrected. A car pulled up. Expensive. Daniel Ashford climbed out slowly, moving carefully, but moving. Porter got out from the driver's side, helped his father. Daniel approached, smiling. He looked thinner than Wren remembered, but his eyes were bright. I had to see it, Daniel said. Had to see what you've done with the place. You were here before, Wren said. In 1954. I was broken, suicidal. Your grandfather saved my life in this cottage. Gave me a reason to keep living. Taught me I could build something with my hands even when everything else was falling apart. He looked at the building. It's beautiful. Better than when Jim was running it, and that's saying something. Do you want to see inside? I'd love that. Wren gave him the tour. Showed him the main room where veterans gathered. The office where counselors met with people. The workshop where Ford taught skills. The photos on the wall documenting the history. Daniel stopped at a photo of the 1954 group. Veterans standing in front of the cottage. He pointed to one face. That's me. 26 years old. Angry at the world. Your grandfather took that photo. Told us we were proof that broken things could be fixed. He turned to Wren. He was right. And you're continuing that proof. Thank you. They walked outside together. Daniel paused at the lighthouse. Your grandfather used to say something, Daniel said. He'd stand right here every morning, look at that lighthouse and say, a promise made is a debt unpaid. I know, Wren said. I read it in his journals. Do you understand it? Really understand it? Wren thought about Tommy dying in dark water, about Charles dying in Korea, about Ford losing his arm and finding purpose, about her father dying to save strangers, about 8 Coast Guard crew members alive because a lighthouse shined. I think I do, she said. A promise isn't something you pay off and forget. It's something you carry every day until you can't carry it anymore. And then someone else picks it up and carries it for you. Daniel smiled. Your grandfather would have liked you. A lot. He shook her hand. Keep the light burning, Wren Hayes. Keep the promise. Daniel and Porter left. The sun was setting, painting the ocean gold and orange. Eleanor put her arm around Wren's shoulders. Are you happy? Wren thought about it, about the year behind her, the cold nights, the hard work, the fear, the victories, the veterans she'd met, the lives touched, the promise kept. I think so, she said. I think this is what happy looks like. Not easy, not comfortable, but right. Ford joined them. The 3 of them stood watching the lighthouse beam begin its nightly rotation. White light cutting through gathering darkness. Your grandfather stood right here, Ford said. Every night, watching that beam. He told me once that lighthouses were prayers made visible. Prayers that people find their way home. That they don't get lost in the dark. That someone somewhere is keeping watch. He kept watch for 50 years. Wren said. Now it's my turn. Our turn, Eleanor corrected. I'm staying, you know, not going back to Portland. Someone has to make sure you eat actual food and go to school occasionally. Wren smiled. I'd like that. They stood together as darkness fell completely. The lighthouse beam swept across the water, regular as a heartbeat. Inside the cottage, lights glowed warm. Voices carried on the evening air. Laughter, hope, life. And somewhere beyond the beam's reach, the ocean kept its rhythm. The same rhythm that had carried Tommy's dying words. That had witnessed James Hayes's promise. That had seen 3 generations of Hayes family choose duty over safety, strangers over comfort, light over darkness. The ocean remembered, and the lighthouse kept watch. Years passed. The Hayes Veterans Resource Center grew slowly, organically, the way good things do when they're built on solid foundations. By the time Wren turned 18 in 1999, the center served over 200 veterans annually. The old workshop had been fully rebuilt, no longer a storage space, but a functioning carpentry training facility, where Ford, now 71, still taught 3 days a week. Eleanor managed the administrative side with the quiet efficiency she brought to everything. She'd sold the Portland house and moved permanently to a small cottage Ford had helped build on the property, close enough to the main building to be present, but far enough to give Wren space to become her own person. The lighthouse stood as it had always stood, but now its beams swept the ocean. Every night officially maintained by the Coast Guard, with Wren listed as civilian keeper. The youngest lighthouse keeper in Maine's history, the newspapers had said. She didn't pay much attention to that. The work mattered more than the title. By 2001, Wren was 20, enrolled part-time at the University of Maine, studying social work while running the center. She'd hired a small staff, 2 counselors, an administrative assistant, a part-time nurse who came twice a week. The center had evolved beyond just carpentry training to include job placement services, counseling, referrals, and housing assistance. Ford remained the heart of it all. His carpentry program had trained over 50 veterans by then, most of whom had found steady work. He moved slower now, his left hand not quite as steady as it once was. But his students still listened with the reverence reserved for true masters. One morning in early spring, 2003, Wren found Ford sitting on the porch of the main building, staring out at the ocean. He looked tired in a way she hadn't seen before. "You okay?" she asked, sitting beside him. "Just thinking," he said, "about Jim, about how he'd have loved to see this, all of it." "I think he does see it," Ford smiled. "Maybe. Your grandmother would say I'm getting sentimental in my old age. You're 75. That's not old. Tell that to my knees." They sat in companionable silence, watching the ocean, the rhythm that never changed. "I got a letter yesterday," Ford said, "from Daniel Ashford's daughter, Porter's sister. She's a doctor now, works with veterans. Said she was inspired by what her father told her about this place. That's good. It is. It's proof that what we do here ripples out, touches people we'll never meet." He paused. That's what Jim understood. The promise wasn't just about the people he helped directly. It was about creating something that kept helping long after he was gone. Wren looked at the cottage at the lighthouse beyond. "Do you think we've done that, kept it alive?" "I think we've done more than keep it alive. We've let it grow. That's what Jim couldn't do, constrained by his time, by regulations, by his own stubbornness sometimes. But you, he gestured at the expanded buildings, the program materials visible through the windows, the veterans arriving for morning coffee. You took what he built and made it relevant, made it sustainable. That's its own kind of promise-keeping. By 2006, the center had expanded again. The medical wing James Hayes had dreamed of in 1947 was finally under construction, funded by a combination of grants donations and a substantial contribution from the State Veterans Affairs Department. It wouldn't be exactly what her grandfather had envisioned. Regulations had changed too much for that, but it would serve the same purpose. A place for veterans to receive primary care, mental health services, and addiction counseling. Wren, now 25, stood at the groundbreaking ceremony with Eleanor Ford and Porter Ashford, whose father, Daniel, had passed away 2 years earlier, after his cancer finally returned. Daniel had lived long enough to see the center's 10th anniversary, long enough to watch it become exactly what James Hayes had dreamed it could be. "My father wanted me to give you this," Porter said, handing Wren a letter after the ceremony. She opened it, Daniel's handwriting shaky but legible. "Dear Wren, if you're reading this, I'm gone, but I wanted you to know what your grandfather's cottage meant to me. In 1954, I came to that place wanting to die. I'd lost everything: my wife, my son, my will to live. The war had broken something in me I thought could never be fixed. Jim Hayes proved me wrong, not with grand speeches or therapy sessions, just with patient presence, with teaching me that my hands could still build things even when my mind was broken, with showing me that being broken wasn't the same as being worthless. He gave me back my life, and in doing so, he gave my son a father, my grandchildren a grandfather. He changed the entire trajectory of my family." That's what the promise meant. Not just saving one person, but saving all the people that one person would go on to touch. Keep the promise alive. Keep the light burning. With gratitude, Daniel Ashford. Wren folded the letter carefully, throat tight. "Thank you," she said to Porter. "No, thank you for finishing what your grandfather started, for proving that promises like his don't have to die with the people who make them." The medical wing opened in 2007. By then, the center served over 400 veterans annually. Ford, now 79, had officially retired from teaching, but still came by 3 times a week to mentor the new carpentry instructor, a Gulf War veteran named Marcus who'd gone through the program 5 years earlier. Eleanor, 83, had slowed considerably, but still managed the center's budget and grant applications with the same sharp mind she'd always had. She'd begun training Wren's assistant director to take over the administrative work, preparing for a transition she knew was coming, but refused to rush. One evening in late fall, as Wren walked the property doing her nightly check, she found Ford standing by the lighthouse. The beam was just beginning its rotation, cutting through the gathering darkness. "Thought I'd find you here," she said. "Habit," Ford replied. "Same as Jim used to do. Stand here. Watch the light. Remember why it matters." They stood together, watching the beam sweep across the water. "I've been thinking," Ford said, "about legacy, about what we leave behind. You've left plenty behind. 50 years of work. Hundreds of veterans trained, lives changed. That's not what I mean. He turned to her. I mean you, Wren. You're my legacy. Not the buildings or the programs. You. Jim's legacy, too. And your father's. 3 generations of Hayes keeping promises. And me getting to be part of that. His voice cracked slightly. That's more than I ever thought I'd have when I came here drunk and broken in '54. Wren took his hand. The left one, the only one. Still strong despite the years. Your family Ford. You always have been. I know. That's what I'm trying to say. Thank you for letting me be. They stood until full dark watching the lighthouse do its work, then walked back to the cottage together. In 2009, on a cold February morning, Ford Mackenzie died peacefully in his sleep at age 81. The funeral was held at the center, attended by over 300 people. Veterans he'd trained. People whose lives he'd touched. Eleanor and Wren. They buried his ashes at the base of the lighthouse in the spot where he'd stood so many evenings watching the beam. A simple marker, Ford Douglas Mackenzie, 1928 to 2009, keeper of promises. Wren gave the eulogy, her voice steady despite the tears. Ford used to say that he owed my grandfather his life. But that's not quite right. My grandfather gave him a chance. Ford did the rest. He chose to live, chose to build, chose to help others the way he'd been helped. That wasn't debt. That was love. And for 64 years, he showed that love through his hands, his patience, his presence. He taught hundreds of people that being broken wasn't permanent, that hands could still create even when hearts were damaged, that promises made by one generation could be kept by the next. He was my grandfather's friend, my father's memory keeper, my teacher, my family, and he was proof that the promise worked, that help given freely multiplies across time in ways we can't imagine. She looked out at the crowd, at faces young and old, at veterans in various stages of healing, at the buildings that housed the work Ford had been part of for 55 years. Ford is gone, but the promise continues, because that's what he taught us. The work doesn't end. The light doesn't go out. We keep watch. We keep helping. We keep the promise. That's what he would have wanted, so that's what we'll do. The years continued to pass. Eleanor died in 2012 at age 88, sharp-minded until the end, passing quietly in her sleep, with Wren holding her hand. They scattered her ashes in the ocean, the same ocean that held the memory of Tommy, of James, of Michael, the ocean that kept all their stories. Wren, now 31, carried on. The center had become one of the most successful veteran support programs in New England. The medical wing was fully operational. The carpentry program had expanded to include electrical work, plumbing, HVAC training. Every graduate found work. She'd built a life, not the conventional kind. She'd never married, never had children of her own. But she'd helped raise hundreds of broken people back to wholeness. She'd kept her promise to Eleanor, too. She'd lived, traveled some, earned her degree, had friends, relationships, experiences beyond the cottage walls. But she always came back to the lighthouse, to the promise. In 2015, on a gray November afternoon, Wren stood in the same spot where she'd stood 20 years earlier as a 14-year-old girl, with a backpack and nowhere to go. The cottage looked completely different now. Professional, maintained, alive. A young woman approached, 20, Army veteran, Iraq War, eyes that had seen too much, too young. "Is this the Hayes Center?" she asked. "It is. I'm Wren Hayes." "I'm Sarah. I heard this place helps veterans who are struggling." Wren smiled. "We do. Come inside. Let me show you what we've built." As they walked toward the cottage, Wren thought about her grandfather, about the promise he'd made in dark water 70 years ago, about how that promise had rippled forward through time, touching lives he'd never meet in ways he'd never imagined. The promise was still being kept, still being honored, still mattering, and it would continue long after Wren was gone, because that's what promises did when they were made to the right people for the right reasons. They lasted forever. The lighthouse beam swept across the darkening sky, and Wren Hayes led another lost soul toward the light, toward hope, toward home. Because that's what lighthouse keepers do. They keep the light burning. They keep the promise. They never stop watching for people who need help finding their way. And in doing so, they prove that some debts, the important ones, can never be fully paid. They can only be honored day after day, life after life, promise after promise, light after light. The ocean remembers, the lighthouse watches, and the promise endures. Because that's what love looks like when it's strong enough to outlive the people who first felt it. When it's deep enough to cross generations. When it's true enough to become something bigger than any one person. A promise made is a debt unpaid, not because the debt can ever be settled, but because the paying of it, the daily, unglamorous, essential work of keeping faith, is itself the point. That's what James Hayes understood in the water 70 years ago, what Ford Mackenzie learned in a cottage by the sea, what Michael Hayes proved in a helicopter over an ice storm, what Wren Hayes carried forward every single day. The work doesn't end. The light doesn't go out. The promise continues. And somewhere in the space between memory and legacy, Tommy and Charles and Ford and James and Michael and Eleanor all watched as another generation picked up the work, kept the light burning, honored the promise. Because that's what families do. Not just families of blood, but families of choice. Families built on shared purpose and mutual commitment, and the understanding that we are all of us responsible for each other. The ocean never forgets, and neither do we.